What happens when someone notices all of our flaws and faults, but recognizes none of the flaws and faults present in a competitor or the person for whom we're competing for a promotion? What happens when two people do exactly the same thing, but one is punished and one is not? What happens when two people do something good? One is recognized, but one is not. I'm Trey Gowdy, and we'll have more coming up. I used to travel a lot, almost every week, same airports, many of the same gates, sometimes even the same airport and airline personnel. I have rarely been the victim of unfairness in my life. I want to hasten to repeat that. I have rarely, if ever, been the victim of real unfairness in my life. I have not been an experiencer of unfairness so much as an observer. It's happened some, but not nearly to the extent of what many of you and many others have experienced. But when you do experience unfairness, even in a small, inconsequential way, it has a profound impact on you. It impacts how you view yourself. It impacts how you view others. It impacts how you think others view you. I was boarding a plane. I was in group 1. I had my ticket on my phone like I always do, and I scanned it like I had done 100 times before. But this time, the airline person checking us in and boarding the plane said, "Step back, it's not your turn." So I stepped back without a word and thought, well, maybe I misheard her. Maybe I did something wrong. Sometimes that is our first reaction when we see disparate treatment or unfairness. We tend to blame ourselves. And then 2 of my colleagues in Congress presented their boarding passes and went on. So I tried again, but it was the same response. Step aside, it's not your turn. This time I did speak up. I said, "Ma'am, my boarding pass says group 1. You're now boarding group 2. Why isn't it my turn yet? Step aside. I'll let you know when it's your turn." And apparently my turn came at the end of group 3. So I boarded the plane. I found my seat. No less than a half dozen other passengers, some of whom were colleagues, some of whom were not, asked, "What was that all about?" My response was, "I have no idea. I was group 1. I have no clue why she did that." I tried to put it out of my mind. I mean, I'm on the plane. I have an aisle seat. I'll make it in plenty of time for votes. It's no big deal. But I couldn't get it out of my mind. It was a small, slight, inconsequential, indiscernibly small, in fact. But I could not get it out of my mind. Why did she do that? So I got to D.C. I called the airline. I said, "I need you to help me understand what I did wrong." It's not that I mind being seated 10 minutes late. I mean, it's not like the plane took off without me. What I minded was that others around me thought I was doing something wrong, trying to board too soon, trying to get away with something, seeking some kind of preferential treatment. And part of me very much did want to know why. Why did she do that? And someone in customer service with the airline called and said they were going to investigate. And then they called me back again, and they did investigate. And the answer was, "We don't know why she did it, but we're going to discipline her." Well, that's not what I want. I don't want her discipline. I don't want her discipline. That's not why I called you. I want to know why she did it. I don't want her to, God forbid, lose her job. I don't want her to be sanctioned. I don't even want her to be reprimanded. I just want to know, why did she do it? Unfairness, even on a small, inconsequential level, has an effect on the person who believes he or she is being treated unfairly. I mean, what happened to me was nothing. What about people or groups who have been treated unfairly in serious, significant, life-changing, or in some instances, life-ending ways? What effect does it have on someone who is treated unfairly? What effect does it have on groups who are treated unfairly? What impact does it have when you are routinely stopped for traffic infractions because of the color of your skin? What happens when you are asked to show identification when you go to cash a check, but others in line are not? What happens when you are passed over and over and over, and passed over even sometimes by people who are less capable than you are? Back to sports, something most of us can relate to as parents, participants, or observers. What happens when the referee fails us? What happens when the person who is supposed to treat us all the same fails us? I'll tell you what happens. It eventually forces the person who is being mistreated to recalibrate fairness in his or her own mind. Rather than valuing even-handedness and objectivity, we begin to openly root for and minimize bad calls, against our opponents. In other words, we reorder, we restructure what is fair. We change our definition of fairness because we have been treated unfairly. We minimize disparate treatment. Being treated unfairly oftentimes leads to us abandoning fairness altogether as an attribute. We become relativists. The end justifies the means because the means is no longer even-handed. When you experience unfairness, you begin to no longer see it as that aspirational virtue that we should all long for. We see it as an illusion, a reality for some, but not for us. And we start looking for makeup calls. We start looking for things to go our way, even if they're undeserved, because the equilibrium needs to be restored. Long-term systemic unfairness changes the way we view the word. It changes our own internal calibration of fairness. In essence, we become relativists because an unfair end with the proper means is not worth honoring the means. One of the reasons I love the sport of golf is that we call penalties on ourselves. I play lots of golf and have played lots of golf with an old friend of mine named Ben Gramling. He's a real estate developer in Charleston, South Carolina, but we grew up playing golf and we played throughout our 20s and 30s. I wish I had a nickel for every time he was off in the woods somewhere behind a clump of trees. He hit his drive somewhere where a pack of bloodhounds and Lewis and Clark couldn't find it, but he found it. And echoing through those trees would be this: Gowdy, I think my ball moved at address. I'm calling a penalty on myself. Well, I couldn't see it. I'm not even sure God could see it that deep in the woods, but that was Ben. He bellowed out, Gowdy, I think my ball moved. I'm calling a penalty on myself. I played a lot of golf with Mick Mulvaney throughout the years. Mick's a fast player. Sometimes he hits, and I'm not even watching. At the end of the hole, I'll say, I got you down for a 4. He'll say, nope, I chunked a chip. It's a 5. I'll say, Mick, I'm sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't see you hit the shot. Sorry. And Mick's response is, whether you saw it or not, I did it. It's a 5. It's not a 4. I played golf with several friends on the other side of the aisle. John Yarmouth, who is a progressive by any definition, from Louisville, Kentucky. Cedric Richmond from Louisiana. Matt Cartwright, Joe Courtney, Jim Clyburn. The experience was the same. Honor, self-policing. The process matters more than the result. No relativism. Golf is different. We call penalties on ourselves. But our culture has become more like professional wrestling, where someone sneaks a pair of brass knuckles into the ring and our reaction is, so what? If it's someone we pull for, we minimize it. When someone is treated unfairly, and I don't pretend to be a psychologist, but I don't think you need to be a psychologist to understand how being treated unfairly impacts people. So when someone is treated unfairly, they may tend to view themselves as excluded from societal norms. They feel isolated. They feel abandoned. It provokes anger. It provokes questions of self-worth. And it challenges our other conventions. But most importantly, unfortunately, regrettably, it leads to a restructuring of what we consider fair. If someone treats me unfairly, what keeps me from evening the score in my own mind? And how do we even the score? We can either treat others more unfairly, or we can begin to judge ourselves by a different, more lax standard, both of which are not good for our culture and for our society. So fairness is a prerequisite to a functioning society. It's a prerequisite to functioning relationships. We assign a very high value to it. Last time we were together, we tried to define it. And this week, we've discussed the impact unfairness has on us, which is a serious, significant impact, and that it recalibrates fairness in our own minds. And it forces us, wittingly or unwittingly, to become relativists, that the end really does justify the means. And if you practice relativism long enough, it leads to nihilism, and your culture falls apart. So fairness is good, unfairness is bad for many reasons, individualized and corporate. But it leads to this question. So who are the referees in our culture? Who are the people who call balls and strikes and do it with neutrality and in a dispassionate way? Who's the arbiter of what is fair and what is not fair in our country? Who calls the balls and strikes, and who calls the penalties? Who metes out the punishment for acts of unfairness? Who do we trust enough to be that referee? I mean, do we even need a referee in our culture? I think we do. I think we need a referee that that we all kind of agree. Whether we like them that particular day or not, they're going to call it fairly.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.